Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a Boeing 737 pilot and a member of PMDG's tech team. In today's video we're going to look at the terrain escape maneuver and some of the features the 737 features to prevent you from having to use it. So, the terrain escape maneuver needs to be accomplished for any Gpws warning, not necessarily for the cautions. Now, how do you differentiate? A Gpws warning is any warning where the aircraft gives you an oral alert saying pull up or obstacle obstacle pull up. So anything that includes pull up in your audio is a Gpws warning. Additionally, the terrain escape maneuver needs to be immediately executed for any other situation resulting in an unacceptable flight towards terrain. Now, don't get confused by the pull up warning. There are several Gpws cautions which display pull up in red on your primary flight display that are, as said, associated with the cautions, not with the warnings. The Gpws includes several cautions, and for any of those, the correct action is to correct the flight path, airplane configuration or airspeed in accordance with your current state of flight. A terrain escape maneuver is not necessary to be executed for those cautions. However, you do have the option available if you want to. So, the following cautions do not require immediate execution of the terrain escape maneuver: sink rate, terrain, don't sink, too low flaps, too low gear, too low terrain, glide slope, bank angle, caution terrain, caution obstacle, and airspeed low. For these oral alerts, you do not necessarily have to carry out the terrain escape maneuver, but you are permitted to correct the flight path as needed. Only once the airplane orally says pull up or obstacle obstacle pull up, you need to execute the terrain escape maneuver. Now, the 737 has the look ahead terrain display. That's what many of you are commonly referring to as terrain radar. But it's not an actual radar. However, that's systems theory. We'll go over that eventually in a separate video. Now, the terrain display is the terrain we see on the navigation display over here. And let me quickly guide you through what the different colors on the display actually mean. So, basically they are a graphical representation of the surrounding terrain and obstacles. When the airplane is 500 feet or more above the highest terrain in the selected display range, terrain is depicted in green and color density varies based on the terrain elevation. Solid green indicates high elevation terrain, high density dotted green indicates intermediate elevation terrain, and low density dotted terrain indicates lowest elevation terrain. Black indicates no significant terrain. You can get a good example of what that looks like when you are, for example, flying overhead the Alps at cruise level and you have the terrain display selected. Now, when the airplane is less than 500 feet above the highest terrain in the selected display range, color and density vary depending on terrain elevation versus airplane altitude. A solid red color means that the look ahead terrain warning is active. Solid amber means look ahead terrain caution is active. We can see this over here. In here we have solid amber, and it also shows you terrain in amber over here, indicating that the look ahead terrain caution is currently active in this scenario. Dotted red terrain is terrain which is more than 2,000 feet above the airplane's current altitude. We can see this over here. And it's also telling us how high the terrain is. It's going up to 9,500 feet in this example. Dotted amber terrain is terrain which is 500 feet below your altitude until 2,000 feet above your current altitude. and note that the lower limit changes to 250 feet with the landing gear down. Dotted green terrain indicates terrain from 2,000 feet below to 500 feet below the airplane's current altitude, and once again that changes to 250 feet with the landing gear down. Black indicates no significant terrain, and dotted magenta is an area where there is no terrain data available. So, from the current picture, we can figure that there is a lot of terrain that's going to 4,000 feet, as indicated by the number over here. And the tops of the mountains actually rise all the way to 2,000 feet above our airplane's altitude, so up to 8,000 feet. And then we have some mountains going all the way to 9,500 feet over here. Note that when we look on the numbers below the terrain over here, the highest one represents the highest terrain on the map, while the lower number indicates the lowest shown terrain. So over here we have terrain going to 4,000 feet, in here up to 9,500 feet. So, then what do you actually need to do when you hear the pull-up warning? Note I'm saying when you hear the pull-up warning. Again, pull-up may be shown in red over here while only caution is active, and terrain escape maneuver is not required for that, but you are required to correct the flight path configuration or airspeed as applicable. So, when you hear pull-up, the following is the terrain escape maneuver. Disengage autopilot, disengage autothrottle, aggressively apply maximum thrust. That means take your thrust levers and firewall them. So put them all the way ahead. Simultaneously roll wings level and rotate to an initial pitch attitude of 20 degrees. Retract the speed brakes, and if terrain remains a threat, continue the rotation up to the pitch limit indicator if installed on your airplane. They are optional on the PMDG 737. Or stick shaker or initial buffet. Do not change gear or flap configuration until terrain separation is assured. Monitor the radar altimeter for sustained or increasing terrain separation. And when clear of terrain, slowly decrease pitch attitude and accelerate. The pilot monitoring is going to assure that the pilot flying has indeed set maximum thrust. He verifies that all actions have been completed and will call out any omissions. He's going to monitor vertical speed and altitude, both radio altitude for terrain clearance and barometric altitude for MSA, and call out any trend towards terrain contact. Now, a small word here on maximum thrust. Maximum thrust can be obtained by advancing the thrust levers to full forward if the EECs, the electronic engine controls, are in normal mode. If terrain contact is imminent, advance the thrust levers full forward no matter what. So, take note here that I said when the EECs are in normal mode. The electronic engine controls will be in normal mode in 99.9% of the flights that flight simmers are actually doing. So, once again, simply firewall your thrust levers. Put them to the maximum possible and make sure the auto throttle is not engaged, otherwise it is going to start pulling them back again. Usually, maximum thrust equals 104% N1 on the 737's engine. Alright, be aware that while you increase the thrust, the pitch thrust couple is going to take effect, so your airplane pitch is going to be pushed upwards when the engine thrust increases. Finally, if terrain remains a threat, continue rotating up to the pitch limit indicator or stick shaker or initial buffet. That means that you're going to rotate your pitch all the way up till you either see the PLIs, that's the two yellow thingies that may appear. We may see them in action in a moment when I'm going to show you the maneuver, or rotate all the way upwards until stick shaker occurs. When stick shaker occurs, just slightly relax the control column and slightly pitch down and keep the pitch almost where it was so that you get intermittent stick shaker activation, and whenever it activates again, just give it a tiny bit less pitch in order to stay just about outside the stick shaker. That is going to give you the maximum performance that you can get out of the 737. And you're going to be surprised by how good that actually works. Finally, do not attempt to engage the autopilot or autothrottle again until terrain clearance is assured. And let me give a final word on the terrain avoidance maneuver on RNAV RMP AR operations. So an example for an RMP AR maneuver might be the RMP approach to Madeira's runway 05. AR stands for approval required, and that means that you're operating in very close proximity to terrain on departure or approach, and crews may actually experience occasional momentary terrain caution level alerts. If these alerts are of short duration and have ceased, crews should verify that they are on the required path and continue using the procedure with LNAV and VNAV. And depending on where initiation of a terrain escape maneuver may occur on an RMP AR approach, the risk of terrain contact while executing the terrain avoidance maneuver may be higher than just continuing on the required track. So terrain warning level alerts always require immediate action, so that's the pull-up. And the most appropriate crew action on an RMP AR approach regarding airplane bank angle and track during a terrain escape maneuver may be dependent on where the maneuver is initiated. Normally you would roll wings level, because it gives you better climb performance, but depending on where you are on the RMP AR maneuver, it may be better to follow the published flight path of that maneuver and initiate the terrain escape maneuver only in the vertical plane, not in the horizontal plane. It's up to the airlines to determine the most appropriate course of action for each leg of the RMP AR procedure, so that crews are prepared at all times. Now, of course, in flight simulation we don't have these, so it will be a little bit up to you as the simulator pilot to decide what course of action is best. Alright, this much about RMP AR. Now, let's quickly revise the terrain escape maneuver before I'm going to demonstrate it to you. Disengage autopilot, disengage autothrottle, aggressively apply maximum thrust, simultaneously roll wings level and rotate to an initial pitch attitude of 20 degrees. Retract speed brakes, and if terrain remains a threat, continue rotation up to the PLIs, or stick shaker or initial buffet. So, now that I'm zooming out again, you will see that there is a nice big cumulus granitus. Yes, that's our term for terrain. And I'm going to do what no pilot ever, not even me as a German first officer, should do. And that's continuing to fly towards the terrain. You will notice that as soon as I'm unpausing the simulator, the terrain caution is already going to play, because I've paused the simulator so far in front of the terrain. But this actually gives you an idea when the cautions and warnings are actually going to activate, so that you have a rough idea of how close you actually are to the terrain. One final word here before we start. You can see I've activated the vertical situation display on the first officer's ND, and that actually gives you a very good vertical situational awareness as well. So consider using the VSD when you're operating in mountainous terrain. So, the moment I'm going to unpause the simulator, I'll engage autopilot and autothrottle, just to be able to show you the complete terrain escape maneuver, including the disconnecting. So, here we go.
Cautions, terrain. Cautions, terrain.
So this is just the caution level. Crew action is required, but not the terrain escape maneuver.
Cautions, terrain. Cautions, terrain. Cautions, terrain. Terrain. Pull up.
And that's the pull-up alert.
Terrain. Pull up. Terrain. Pull up.
So, 20 degrees. And we can go even further if we want to. The VSD is giving us a good indication here of how we are clearing the terrain. So now we are out of terrain vicinity, so we can pitch down again. And from here we can resume a normal flight path. So that is the terrain escape maneuver. Note that flight director guidance is not available for the maneuver. So once you're out of it, ensure that you have a lateral mode, in this case heading select. Ensure a vertical mode. So in this case we can go to 11,000 feet. Level change. Engage the autopilot, engage the auto throttle. And that completes the re-engagement sequence of the automatics. So this is the terrain escape maneuver. You can see that the 737 is able to develop some exceptional climb rates, and chances are when you get this warning you still have sufficient time to clear the terrain. So thank you very much for joining, I hope you found this useful, and I'm looking forward to see you all on the next video.